The Sword of the Lictor was written in 1982 by Wolfe, and it's the third book in the Book of the New Sun. In this one, Severian starts by continuing his journey through the peculiar realm outside of Nessus. This book has really satisfyingly high highs and really dull, boring lows. It stays true to the brilliance, but also the frustrating obtuseness of the first two books in the series. After being his goal since nearly the beginning of the first book, Severian finally makes it to Thrax, which I sort of envision like some sort of South American, Brazilian favela. He's called the titular Lictor of Thrax, which is the city's executioner and chief jailer. This is more the same of the first two books, and that includes some undeniably great stuff to me. There's more payoff of things that are set up in the first and second books. It has the return of one of my favorite parts of the series, which is the way that Wolfe mentions something that's clearly sci-fi, but he does it in a way that's not fantasy or not genre fiction type way. Wolfe excels with more vivid descriptions. If you're a fan of the macabre like me, you'll love the gruesome, depressed world and the scenarios that Wolfe cooks up, which is almost like a Dark Souls aesthetic. Just listen to the way that he describes this sick girl. She was in that state of disease in which we no longer feel pity for a sick person, who has instead become an object of horror. Her face was a death's head, over which was stretched skin as thin and translucent as the head of a drum. Her lids could no longer cover her teeth even in sleep, and under the scythe of fever, her hair had fallen away until only wisps remained. As with the positives, more of the same includes a lot of the negative stuff as well. There's more stuff that shows up in one scene only to be never seen again in another scene. It's got more of that unique prose that's that challenging at best, horrible at worst, pseudo-puzzle throughout the entirety of the book. Let's talk about some other good things that I found in the book. First, I want to touch on something that I've mentioned in my reviews of Shadow and Claw, but that really showed its color as a main theme of this series. And that's the humanization and the depiction of Severian as an evil yet kind, ignorant yet thoughtful, and hateful yet loving character. Sometimes things felt counterindicative, like sometimes he would do something to promote his guild in one chapter, and just one chapter later, he'd do something that completely went against his guild's values. This really bothered me at first until I noticed how it was really Wolfe's ingenious depiction of Severian's identity struggle. This is, at its core, a coming-of-age series. Wolfe and Severian even say this at one point. We have each of us in the dustiest cellars of our mind a counter at which we strive to repay the debts of the past with the debased currency of the present. Wolfe challenges you to think about Severian dynamically. On the one hand, he's a dastard, but on the other hand, there's real growth, and he does have redeeming moments. He has a troubled past with no good role models. I switched up like every chapter what I thought of him, and that is a sign of an excellent character, in my opinion. And it's very applicable to people in the real world. It forces you to push aside that false dichotomy of a good person or a bad person. The shift of Severian from an overall bad to an overall, I wouldn't say good, but an multifaceted character is hinted at throughout the book, but there are moments where Wolfe says this explicitly. Like near the end of the book when Severian sees a girl and she's brutally eviscerated, she's tortured, and she's dying, and Severian notes that she, quote, once would have not bothered the torturer Severian in the least. He's clearly a lost and confused young man. The main plot of this series is essentially him just being guided by his nebulous loyalty to different things, like the Guild, Vodalus, the Claw, and the Pellerines. Dissociated completely from Wolfe's depiction of Severian as a good or a bad character, he's really also just a vehicle for Wolfe's insight. Quote, all of us, I suppose, when we think we are talking most intimately to someone else, are actually addressing an image we have of the person to whom we believe we speak. I'll admit the book can get tried, but I always found myself being brought back in with Wolfe's insightful musings through Severian. Okay, let's just move back to generally good things about the book. A lot of the main good meat of this series is Severian's connection to characters. In Shadow, we had his guild masters, Thecla and Agia. In Claw, we had Jonas and Yolenta and Vodalus. And in this book, we especially have Dorcas and a new character, a young boy who Severian takes on as somewhat of a son, someone he sees as a younger version of himself. And these relationships really hit for me. Just in terms of general surface level things that I really enjoyed in this book, there are a few things that I thought were so creative and well written. There's this group of people living on moving islands, and they have this political conflict with the people on the shore. And it's really interesting to read about. I don't like a lot of the politics in this series, but this was really cool. As someone who doesn't like physical action really in his books, the hand-to-hand, sword-to-sword fighting in this book in particular was really edge-of-your-seat stuff. Maybe that's because so much of the book feels monotonous, but I do really think it bangs. There's plenty of new little themes that are explored as well, like Dorcas commentating on what it means to be alive, but let's move on to talking a bit about how I thought the book struggled. The book is still so confusing. Even on the main big plot points. What's his obsession with returning the claw to the Pelorines? What happened to his love for Votilis? Now that we're 3 books into the series, I don't necessarily expect these questions to be answered, and perhaps that's because I am an ignorant surface level reader, but a lot of me wishes that these were more fleshed out. Sometimes people go on these long rants, and I know that this is partly my fault, but these long, monotonous moments of pensiveness, they're really just extremely boring to me. I feel like this series is at its best, and it's consistently better and more readable when we're in a town or there's otherwise something moving Severian along in the plot. Some element that's moving the plot around and moving Severian in a specific direction. All these chapters of him walking around the countryside, just pontificating endlessly about his thoughts and emotions and feelings and his past and his future, they're just dry and honestly so uninteresting. And it feels sort of just like Wolfe is losing his momentum and his train of thought. I get that it's to set up future things, but Wolfe just gets way too theoretical and head in the clouds for me sometimes. It's kind of like a friend that if you don't cut them off, they will literally talk forever. It's not even like it's unimportant either. It's just too much theory and thought all at once. Sometimes it's like Severian is a podcaster and just nobody asked. Another thing, I cannot stand these seemingly random stories completely disconnected from the plot of the book that come up multiple times a book that are just random plays or stories from Wonders of Earth and Sky. They're just extremely uninteresting, and they're hard to follow, and they don't have anything to do with the plot of the book. Well, they probably do, but I couldn't pick it up, so it just ends up being a chapter or two of something that seems like a complete sidetrack that's not even really interesting. Finally, this whole book, and this series to an extent, just feels like completely disconnected scenes in a play. They feel kind of just disconnected, and the whole thing seems episodic. That's even exemplary in the chapter names. There'll be a chapter called like Benjamin, and Severian meets Benjamin. And then the next chapter, which is called something else, he'll have completely forgotten about Benjamin, and we won't hear about Benjamin again. It's like tabletop RPGs, where you roll a dice and you have a random encounter with some civilian, and then after it, you never encounter or think about them again. Things don't follow well from one scene to the next. In conclusion, The Sword of the Lictor is everything Book of the New Sun. It doesn't stray much from the literary roadmap that Wolfe sets up in the first 2 books. Wolfe continues to flex his literary muscles with his exemplary character depiction, both of Severian and of the characters around him. It finally starts to feel like we're getting some payoff to the mysteries set up in the first 2 books, and that's extremely refreshing. That being said, it lacks where the other books do as well. Its prose remains frustrating, some plot lines remain confusing, and the story suffers from some really lifeless, dull troughs of Severian caught up in his own thoughts. Overall, a very Book of the New Sun book. Thanks for watching.